Broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining. We'll be discussing Software Vulnerability Manager and discussing software vulnerability management as a general problem and how our SVM product helps to address it. Before we get started, you are in listen-only mode. We are recording this so we can share the recording. If you do have any questions, there is a question panel. Please ask any questions along the way, and we'll have some time at the end to address any that come up. So we are working with Roadmap Technologies. Those are the guys that got you here. Our thanks to them. They're a great partner of ours that we trust to do all kinds of things from application packaging, leveraging our Admin Studio tools, application lifecycle management. They're covering packaging and software asset management and vulnerability management, all things that Flexera provides products and services around as well. So obviously a very good fit with Roadmap's focus and their focus on mergers and acquisitions and all the challenges that come with that are a perfect opportunity to really add value to that process through these same mechanisms. So thank you to Roadmap for having me here. My name is Bob Kelley. I am a Director of Product Management at Flexera. I run the Admin Studio and Software Vulnerability Management product lines. I've been in the space for some time. I was an MVP. I've written some books. I started the App Deploy, which is now IT Ninja communities back in the day, and have just been kind of around the space for a long time. I'm really excited to actually be, applying my product management skills to those solutions that help solve the problems that I've been associated with for such a long period of time. But just to set things up, this is a slide I'm not really fond of, but the general idea here is, from a vulnerability standpoint, the bad guys are working all the time. As soon as a new vulnerability exposes itself or they find one, they're trying to weaponize it and take advantage of it, and they are doing so very quickly. So we have to respond quickly in response. And for the way we look at this is there's some periods of time when it comes to vulnerability to think about. So there's the time of disclosure when that vulnerability is documented. So somebody finds something that's bad, that company typically issues a CVE or report saying, hey, we have this problem and this is how you can work around it, or here's the patch to fix it. That's the disclosure time when you should be knowing about it. Unfortunately, there's some period of time typically before you become aware of it. So there's this time between disclosure and awareness, and then, okay, you're aware of it, but you've got a lot going on, a lot of other things you need to do besides remediate vulnerabilities, and so it's not necessarily going to get done as fast as you would hope it would. About 99% of the exploited vulnerabilities out there are already known. So the disclosure has happened. The vendor or a white hat or somebody has published something saying, hey, this is a known issue, and there's a workaround, be aware of it, do something about it. 99% of the time, that's the case. So 99% of the time, we should be able to get in front of it and prevent something bad from happening. The time to first exploit, we're saying a hacker's working quickly around the clock. The kind of general rule is it's about 30 days before the first exploit shows itself. This is a very general number, but it's one that a lot of people try to establish SLAs around. So depending on the severity of the vulnerability, they'll say, we're going to give ourselves up to 30 days to take care of this. But beyond that, we're increasing our risk too much that there'll be something to come attack it. The problem is between disclosure and awareness and then the time it takes to get to remediation, 186 days is the current typical period of time it takes between any given vulnerability being disclosed to being patched. And that's obviously a lot more than 30 and exposing you to a lot more risk than you would want. So we need to shrink this risk window. Disclosure and awareness. With a product like SVM, you can be aware of the vulnerability right away and then get it remediated. And meeting that 30-day SLA becomes a lot more reasonable a challenge to address. It's not always the same. So, the more software you have in your environment, the more applications you have to keep track of. If we look at something like Microsoft updates, the time between disclosure and awareness is the same day. There's nothing, because we know that they're going to disclose them all on Patch Tuesday with the patches. So as a result, most organizations have a good handle on dealing with Patch Tuesday, and the Microsoft updates, everybody's on top of them. So that's a very good thing, but it's not always that case, right? So Java, Adobe Flash, these are also have updates all the time, but you may not find out about them right away. And then you probably are prioritizing them because they're common applications that commonly have vulnerabilities that you have to stay on top of because your organization relies upon them. But other third-party applications are going to vary a lot. Some of them, they don't do a very good job of letting you know, or you're not plugged in to find out about a security update being available. And then others, they're just not on as many machines, or there's different reasons that they just don't get prioritized as high as the big guys, and therefore leave you open to risk longer. And then, of course, if you don't know what's out there, an unknown application, your time to awareness is infinite. If you don't even know the app is out there, you don't know to be looking for a security update for that application. And the majority of vulnerabilities just don't get addressed. So Microsoft represents about 22.5% of the vulnerabilities disclosed. Like I said, you probably have a good process around that, stay on top of that. But a big percentage, all the rest, are non-Microsoft, and those are the ones that most people are more susceptible to because they're not as on top of it. And the way a lot of companies try to address that is say, well, we'll focus on the big guys, not just Microsoft, but we know Adobe and Chrome and Mozilla and Java are also updates that are released frequently that we really need to stay on top of. So we focus on the big guys, including Microsoft, but that's only getting us to about half of the vulnerabilities out there. So this common approach still leaves a big open window in terms of what is potentially on your network that could cause your organization damage. So how do you deal with that? Or why can't you deal with that? If you're finding out about these things, you have a system in place to know that there's a security update. Why does it take so long to get out? It's because there's just too much going on. There's new application requests coming in regularly. It's not just when there's a Windows migration. There's always new requests coming in. And then functionality updates. There's a new version of this application and that application. They're not always security updates. The security updates are arguably your most important, so you'll prioritize those. But there are just a lot coming in terms of the need to package, test, and deploy new and updated applications for various reasons. And it can take hours to do, even days, sometimes weeks, depending on how complicated an application is and the effect it has on your environment. Java is, a big pain in the neck for anybody trying to keep an organization up to date. And the result, the ugly truth of this, is we end up in a situation where only 1 in 10 patches are typically addressed. In a recent study, that's what was found, and that's should be a real eye opener. And hopefully you're saying not me and my organization, but it is a pretty serious problem. So SVM, the Software Vulnerability Manager product, is built upon Secunia research. So Flexera acquired Secunia a few years back when the product was referred to as CSI, and that product is now SVM 2019, the one that we're currently selling, but it is fed by the security research team. So this is a group of security analysts that have been in the space for a very long time and have a very good track record of staying on top of alerts. And the real extra mile they go, a lot of products will just pull straight from NVD, the public vulnerability database, but a lot of that is garbage. A lot of that is simply not true or mismarked or not marked properly from a criticality standpoint, so you can't prioritize it effectively. What the security research team does is they validate all of those. They'll dismiss any that shouldn't be of concern to you for various reasons, and will publish why. And then the other thing they do is rescore the vulnerabilities. So based on a very set of rules, you get a reliable score without bias from the vendor or whoever found it and wants to make a splash about the vulnerability they discovered. This is a more methodical scoring approach, and it leverages the same CVSS score that you're probably familiar with, that scoring mechanism. And then finally, a thing about the research that is done in support of the SVM product that's really cool is the concept of creating a security advisory. So instead of just seeing, hey, this CVE needs to be addressed, and security will go to ops and say, hey, here are 5 CVEs that you need to address. And then ops has to figure out, okay, what vulnerabilities do these actually affect? Sometimes it's multiple applications or multiple versions of an application. It depends, how severe it is, depends on what is the attack vector, what is the way that this can be exploited, and does it require local access, does it require an account? There's all kinds of variables about what you care about, and these advisories are product focused, so it'll be about a specific version of a specific application, and then that advisory will get a score and be described in that way, but may contain 1 or a dozen or more CVEs, because the remediation for all of these bugs and all these potential vulnerabilities is to apply this one patch. So it really simplifies the vulnerability disclosure activity happening and helps it be a lot more relatable to your environment and keeping it up to date and effectively prioritizing it. And effectively prioritizing is what's really key when you have a good view of your environment. So when you install something like SVM, you get a true picture of your vulnerability risk. It can be overwhelming because now you see, well, I thought I had a dozen applications I probably had to update, but now I realize I have 100 applications that I need to update. And knowing that is daunting, because as you start to attack that list of 100, new ones are going to pop up. So you can't just take all the patches and throw them over the fence and hope that you become more secure as a result, because just deploying an update comes with its own risk. You have to test that and make sure that it installs the way you think it will, that it doesn't have a negative effect on the system or other applications, or these updates themselves can be your own injected damage. The vulnerability didn't even get exploited, but you tried to update it and broke everybody. You're causing your own problems. So there's work that needs to be done, and you can't do them all. So prioritization is super important. Like I said, if you can't patch them all, then you just have to be focusing on the right ones. And like I said before, without some information like the exposure that SVM gets you, people will just focus on the big vendors and hope that is taking care of them. But like I also said, that only covers about half. And arguably, that other half, the bad guys know are more worth their time, because they can create an exploit that does damage, and it's less likely to face a patch where it doesn't work anymore, because it's this other half of the applications that people are routinely taking very long periods of time to get to, or not patching at all. So there's a couple of different things that SVM can expose to help you prioritize effectively. How to prioritize isn't going to be the same for every organization, so there's no definitive, this is the most important one, you should do something about this, because it really is unique to each organization. The vulnerabilities that are applicable to you, their criticality is obviously very important, but so is the sensitivity of that asset, so is how prevalent that application is on the network. So in turn, how much impact the work you do to create a patch is going to have. And SVM gives you these different insights. So to talk through each one real quick, prevalence, this is basically an inventory of insecure instances of an application in your environment. So you can see, I have Adobe Reader in my environment, but I probably have 10 different versions of Adobe Reader throughout a large environment of, say, 5,000, 10,000 systems. So knowing that there's a vulnerability out there for it is of some help. I know I should probably get that taken care of, but I don't know how many older versions I necessarily have, or vulnerable versions more specifically, I may have in my environment. And SVM gives you that because it is using file signatures to look on endpoints and see, do you have these known vulnerable versions of these known applications? And that list is over 50,000 strong, but rather than trying to look at your inventory and versions and figure out what you have and which different versions are applicable, this is laser focused on exactly what you need to know in terms of how prevalent a vulnerability is in your environment that could help you to decide, should this be a high priority or not. Criticality, obviously a big one. Like I said, we use the CVSS scoring method, and it's based on all these different things. And this is, if the vulnerability were to be exploited, how damaging would it be? If it's got a situation where it can be done remotely without credentials, and that's pretty extremely critical, and then all the way down to not critical at all. But this is well understood. But like I said, at this level, this is at the advisory level, so it's more about what patch you need to deploy, and not just individual vulnerabilities that will somehow apply to some number of applications. It's very specific. And beyond the CVSS score, SVM also offers its own criticality rating for easy sorting. So from extremely critical down to not critical, extremely critical being something that's remotely exploitable, it doesn't require any interaction, and the exploits are in the wild right now. And the vulnerabilities could exist on a common network device. Those were all attributes of an extremely critical criticality rating here. And there's obviously documentation for the whole list that I won't go into here. But suffice it to say, from a criticality standpoint, there's a couple of different ways that you can look at this and effectively prioritize. And then, of course, asset sensitivity is also very important. And so you can create groups, you can rely on your AD structure, but in many cases, there are systems that are simply more sensitive than others. If you have a server that isn't connected to the internet and it's in a safe room, a man-in-the-middle attack isn't something you need to jump on patching right away. It's in a perfect world, you update everything, but if you accept that you're only going to get to 1 in 10 or half of the ones that are vulnerable just because of volume, then that falls in the category of one that you consciously let go. Whereas if your CFO is traveling overseas and has a whole bunch of vulnerable applications on his system, that asset is more critical and needs to be prioritized differently. So there's a bunch of different ways to look at it is what this comes down to. And the new one that we've added recently I want to talk a little more about is threat intelligence. And threat intelligence is a very broad industry term. It can mean a lot of things in the security world. Here we're talking about the actual risk of a vulnerability to be exploited. So the fact that this is a vulnerability means that something could happen. An exploit means that something is happening. and only 6 to 10% of the vulnerabilities that are detected actually end up seeing an exploit. So, up to 90% of the things that we're prioritizing and patching without insight to threat intelligence don't necessarily even need to be patched. Now, this again becomes more of a prioritization exercise, because you want to get these that have known threats today taken care of first, but something that doesn't have a threat today may have a threat tomorrow. So looking at things like criticality and prevalence and asset sensitivity are all still very valid for the prioritization of your entire list. And the reason we added threat intelligence and are making a big deal about it is it really is a much better way to look at things. It's a very important aspect of how to effectively prioritize. A lot of organizations will say, we're just going to attack any CVE that affects our environment that has a CVS score or 7 or higher. That will, get a strong SLA. We're going to really prioritize those. But that only addresses about 50% of exploits, not vulnerabilities, exploits. So that's bad. Most exploits actually come between 4 and 7, which is the medium range. CVSS score of 4 might never get prioritized without some insight into what exploits are out there with threat intelligence. And then, we talked about the top vendors, and I named a handful. Even if you jack that up to 20 vendors and say the top 20 vendors are what I'm going to stay on top of, that's only 20% of exploits. That goes back to my statement earlier of, the 50% that aren't Microsoft or the big guys getting attacked more. They're richer targets for the bad guys because people are so slow to address them. The way we expose this is through a simple score, so that you can sort and create groups and things very easily, like you would with criticality or prevalence or other metrics. So it's a 0 to 99 score based on things like, is it associated with malware or an exploit kit or ransomware? As these things come up, these different things will trigger rules that increase the score, the threat score that we put against that advisory, and becomes a very effective way for you to see which things really require attention sooner. So in the end, more data, better decisions. By having threat intelligence, we add a fourth circle to this Venn diagram where you can again decide, I don't care so much about prevalence, or I care more about criticality, or more about asset sensitivity. It really does depend on the environment, and a good partner like Roadmap would come in and help assess what makes the most sense for you. But all this data in one place and being able to slice and dice the devices in your environment and the patches that affect your environment in these different ways are super important to getting your risk lowered as fast as possible. And one more thing I wanted to add here, that's kind of the big story around Software Vulnerability Manager is the research. I talked about security research and the advisories and the great stuff happening there. There's a couple thousand a year, and if Roadmap does a demo for you, you'll see when you look at the list, there's a good number of new vulnerabilities being written up, new advisories being written up on a daily basis. So constant effort going on there, great research. Then that lends itself to assessment, where we say, okay, from all that research, these are the ones that affect you in your environment, and which devices and which applications in your environment are affected. And then you get all that information from asset sensitivity to criticality to the threat intelligence to help you effectively prioritize it. That's super important, but getting those patches out as fast as possible is also very important. And we're just releasing this week a new patch capability that dramatically increases the number of out-of-the-box patches that we provide. We'll be providing over 1,000 patches out of the box, which is more than any competitor in the industry. Those are all tested and ready to deploy. The actual deployment of patches happens using your existing deployment infrastructure, so this isn't a new agent that's going to be installing things. It's going to leverage WSUS or SCCM. So you effectively are leveraging the way you handle Microsoft updates and extending that to support third-party application updates. And with the research and the insights and the prioritization, this huge set of patches is going to help get you across the finish line at the end to actually remediating it. Now, of course, they do still need to be tested, but not having to spend the time to identify what the latest version is, if it has a security update, what the impact is, then get the actual software for deployment, figure out what the silent command line details are, test that, and then get that to a pilot system. That's where everything's really coming together and speeding up with a solution like SVM. We can get you to a point where you're publishing to your pilot systems, making sure that it doesn't have a negative effect, and then promoting that to a wider production deployment. Not only do we have 1,000 patches available out of the box, but we've got details on 1,000 other vendor installers to help you build your own patches faster. So there's a concept of bring your own patch in Software Vulnerability Manager, where if we don't provide it, you can add your own. You can still, of course, do that, but we've got the details on over 1,000 other patches to get you most of the way there. It could be that we are missing the vendor setup file, because sometimes vendors will gate that behind a paywall. You have to be a paying customer to access the setup. We can't distribute it, but we may very well have information about what's the latest version, what's the tested silent command line to install it, what's the applicability criteria that allows you to determine if the patch should be installed on that system or not. We could have all of that and not the download. You can just provide that download file and you've got your patch. So 1,000 out of the box and then 1,000 more that are really easy to build, actually together getting us to around the 3,000 mark is a really significant asset to your organization when it comes to remediating patches, because the time it takes to test and figure out how to get a proper update out the door is really the long pole in the tent that makes this process take so long. Others might be missing the silent command line because the vendor doesn't support one. My other product, Admin Studio, is designed to help fit that situation where you can wrap or create your own silent customized installer for a product or convert it to a virtual format. Or it could be that we're missing detection criteria where we have the file and we have the silent installation command, but there isn't a good default installation path and file for us to look at to say it's applicable to that particular machine. The good thing there is for the applications that we detect, we know where they were found in your environment. We can dynamically offer to you those paths and file paths as applicability criteria for your own unique environment. So while there's 1,000 out of the box, the other 1,000 could be very easy to take advantage of. We don't publish updates to Mac systems, like using Jamf Pro, for example, but we do research Mac. We do have an agent to assess Mac for what vulnerabilities are affecting it. And with this patch capability that we're launching next week, we will have over 100 Mac applications that you can download and then take over to Jamf for a typical deployment. So a lot of insight and time savings there, even though we don't have a direct connector to publish like we do to Microsoft. And of course, this database is evolving daily. It's such a massive database that there are literally 100 updates happening every day with new versions being released and our automated tests passing and failing and all of the different things that go into making sure that what we're providing is going to save you time and not cause you pain. This is kind of a snapshot of what it looks like. If you get a POC or a demo from Roadmap, they can show you this. They can show you how it affects your environment. You can see here we've got the advisory that I mentioned, the security advisory for the application. We've got the criticality, the threat score if there is one. If there's an exploit against it like this one, you can prioritize that, and then how many instances there are. If it's end of life or if it's vulnerable or or secure. You can get all that insight and slice and dice it a bunch of different ways. There's this concept of smart groups where you can set all kinds of criteria and filter this list down. But there's just a massive amount of information here to really help you to get your vulnerabilities detected and mitigated as quickly as possible. And with that, I will take any questions. I see one. Is there a plugin for SCCM or WSES to import desired applications when patches are released? Or does everything have to be done manually? So there is a plugin for SCCM so that you can get some of the SVM interface via MMC Snap-in. And in terms of taking advantage of your inventory, you can go about it a couple of different ways. So we have an agent you can install, but I understand and talk to people regularly who cringe at the idea of having another agent on their system, no matter how lightweight or unintrusive it is. So what we have is an ability to look at your SCCM inventory as the source. That's not as accurate and comprehensive as the agent approach, to just look at the inventory, because the inventory doesn't necessarily include everything we need to make a definitive decision about the presence of a vulnerable application or not. But the more popular way to go about it is our agent can actually just be run as a task. So a lot of our customers will take the SVM agent and run it as a scheduled task via SCCM. So once a day, once a week, a couple times a day, however frequently you want, it is essentially just running the command and shutting down. And the results go up to SVM and feed those reports and filters that I've been shown. So you don't necessarily have to deploy an agent, and the interaction with SCCM is quite strong. I don't see any other questions. Maybe I'm not looking at this thing right. A moment. Well, that's the only one I see. So
hey Bob, this is Howard. There are a couple more questions in there. I'll read them out to you.
Please.
Sure. So one question: how long after patch release does it take for it to be tested and available from Flexera?
So about a day. So we're detecting new versions of applications in that vendor patch module I showed on a constant basis, and we update it daily. And we're running automated tests for the silent command lines and applicability rules on a regular basis. So it takes about a day.
So another question: in the past, the customizations were limited to what vendor setup.exe would accept via command line. Has the product expanded to allow importing of MSP files, or is the product capable of producing MSP files natively? Adobe Acrobat is a perfect example.
Yeah, so where an MSP is being provided for an update, we take advantage of that. So the patches we have included in the product and in that vendor patch module definitely include MSPs and MSUs. It's however the vendor is providing it. So we can definitely take advantage of that. For the most part, when we're talking about a patch, it really is the full installer. So it's uncommon. Microsoft does it. Like you said, Adobe does it, but it's fairly uncommon for people to release a legitimate update that's just updating the files necessary, just because of bandwidth and drive, inexpense of bandwidth and drive space these days. Everyone is, for the most part, just providing updated installer, and that that full install package will be leveraged to replace the current version that's on the system. So I'd say in 97, 98% of the time, and patch isn't an update, but really a complete reinstallation or update of the product. The same way you would go about deploying it to a fresh system.
And Bob, could you maybe touch base on the being able to create your own patch through software vulnerability management?
Sure. So we are detecting over 50,000 applications. Nobody has a patch catalog of 50,000 applications. So there are going to be situations where there is an update that you want to deploy that that we don't have for you at hand. So you can just say you want to add your own patch, and you would provide the vendor setup, the silent command line, and you would dictate the criteria for which that update is applicable. That typically means, a system variable path to a specific executable, say the primary executable for the application. And you would say if this file is version this or higher, then it is applicable. And that's basically what differentiates a package from a patch, in my opinion, is the fact that the applicability criteria is part of the patch versus, a smart rule separated in your deployment product for where something's applicable. In this case, it's just being published everywhere, and the logic of if it should run or not is in the package, or in the patch rather. So those are really the three ingredients. You need the vendor installer, you need the silent command line, and you need the applicability rules. And with those, you can add a patch for any application you care to update.
Thanks for touching base on that. One more question. Is there a complete list of the apps that are fully packaged by Flexera and the info available on what apps that Flexera advises but doesn't package?
Yes. So not today, because like I said, we're releasing this next week. But we will have a web page that describes the patch module and what it includes, and so along with that will be a searchable, filterable list of all the patches that we provide, updated on a daily basis. So it'll be, by vendor, by product, by version, and the ones that we have an out-of-the-box patch for will be highlighted or with an asterisk to show you this is an out-of-the-box patch versus one that we are just providing some, as much as we can to help, but not everything. So look for that next week.
Outstanding. I think that covers all the questions that are currently in queue.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much. I appreciate the opportunity, and again, happy to answer any further questions through Roadmap or online.
Thanks, everybody.